Well, if you've turned on cable news in the last 48 hours, first off, hello, Grandma. Can't wait until you're old enough to run on the Democratic ticket. And second off, you know that after Eakin won out in Iowa, followed by a narrow victory in New Hampshire, Bernie Sanders steamrolled the Nevada caucus and now appears poised as the Democratic fucking frontrunner. I guess the left enjoyed the Jeremy Corbyn BTFO apocalypse so much, they decided to make an American adaptation of it. And like most American versions of UK comedies, it's all but assured to be shit. Now, mind you, the mental hospital hoedown that is Super Tuesday will ultimately tell the tale definitively, but generally in a primary, whether Democratic or Republican, one victory confers momentum upon subsequent ones as the party gradually builds consensus around a single candidate. Meaning 3 or 4 victories fucking deep at this point, it's no wonder the previously non-existent distance between the candidates and their com-intern frontrunner is gradually widening like Movie Bob's eyes at the Wonka factory. Admittedly, an awful lot can change in the remaining months before we make the awkward Family Guy-esque flashback transition from the primary to the general election. Just think back to when we all thought Herman Cain would face fucking Obama in 2012, followed by Gingrich, followed by the cuck from Kolob, Mitt Romney. Shit sorts out fast in primary politics is my point, but it's far from fucking unreasonable to assume Bernie Sanders, the guy who's won the first 3 caucuses, will finagle his Fidel Castro humping ass into the winner's circle before it's all said and done. And to that I say, good.
That's a good thing.
But Razör, you disagree with Sanders. How can you conceivably say his nomination is in any way a fucking positive? Simple, Sammy Strawman, because in all parties, in all eras, a political party at bay is faced with a fork in the road. Forward and electable moderate who will perform adequately outside the socialist sinkholes run by coastal elites, or hang a hard left with a quasi-commie who looks less and less quasi by the fucking day, give your subatomic-sized base a 7-alarm stiffy, and go down like a leper in a game of goddamn Twister in the general. And as easy as that decision appears on paper, the siren song of socialism is a seductive temptress indeed, when so much of the collectivist agenda was enacted effectively without incident due to the still not relinquished crisis powers afforded the government during the dog days of World Wars I and fucking 2. In short, the left had spent the majority of the 20th century cultivating an air of entitlement after a century of subverting individual rights in the name of the so-called collective good. I mean, fuck, they sold Social Security to the public as government insurance, backpedaled so fast they high-fived the negative flash when the Supreme Court challenged the government's ability to sell insurance, only to reverse course once the activist FDR had stacked the Supreme Court with decreed that yes, selling insurance to the public was in fact foreseen and endorsed by founding fathers who debated for days over whether government should even form a fucking military or not. Sounds la-fucking-jit! Returning to the topic at hand, this happened to Republicans in the age of Buchanan, and yes, even my boy Goldwater. It happened with Democrats with the world-class failures of Mondale and Dukakis, who with the benefit of hindsight sound like bona fide moderates, but by the standards of '84, running pro-abortion candidates in the shadow of Roe v. Wade was out of step with mainstream society in the extreme. But the far lefties in the DNC were fucking riled, they ran him against Reagan, and the rest is ream job history. In the immortal words of Dennis Miller, I got as many electoral votes as Walter Mondale, and I didn't even fucking run. And believe it or not, that's ultimately a positive, healthy occurrence, because it demonstrates what isn't working and steadily realigns the party to a more electable fucking posture. Without Mondale or Dukakis, Bill Clinton never comes to power, effectively saving the fucking party in the process. Point being, Democrats should have had their McGovern moment in 2016 and started this cycle of renewal all over again. That is, until another Clinton and her cankles slid the shiv between Bernie's shoulder blades, not only kicking the can of political palingenesis down the road, but by losing the general to Trump, implying in the process to Sanders supporters that Bernie would have won instead. As I believe I've demonstrated ably in the past, that argument's a heap of horseshit. But Bernie's supporters don't know that, and now they're galvanized. This genie has parted company with the bottle, and emboldened by 4 years of Russian conspiracies and the incredible imploding impeachment, it's looking to stay split. But you may be surprised to learn that my most profound words of caution go not to the far left, but to moderates and to the right. Namely, Those harping on about Bernie's promises of free shit, crunching numbers like Count Von Count on crystal meth, as if Bernie's base gives the beginnings of a fuck about their impossible arithmetic. Look, I know it, you know it, anyone with enough fingers to fucking count knows it. We can't afford the unfunded liabilities we already have, let alone a $30 trillion socialized medicine snow job. And yes, friends, that's trillion with a T as in Trotsky.
How much will that cost?
Obviously, those are expensive propositions, but we have done our best on issue after issue in paying for them.
Do you know how much, though? I mean, do you have a price tag for all this?
We do. I mean, you know, the price tag is, it will be substantially less than letting the current system go. I think it's about $30 trillion.
That's just for Medicare for all.
Just Medicare for all, yes.
Do you have a price tag for all of these things?
No, I don't. We try to, no.
Bernie has talked about providing health care for free from the government. You know what? The liberal-leaning Urban Institute scored Bernie's health plan, concluded it would cost $2.5 trillion in the first year and $32 trillion over 10 years. All of the federal income taxes we pay today are about $1.5 trillion a year. Every one of us paying income taxes would have to about triple what you pay in income taxes to get an additional $2.5 trillion. Now, Bernie, no doubt, is going to come back and say, no. None of you are going to pay. Just the rich. Well, how about if we took every person that makes over $1 million a year and confiscated 100% of their income, took every penny that they make? That would raise only enough money to fund Bernie's plan for 5 months. Here's another idea. How about
when not even Glanderson Pooper can suspend disbelief for the 5 seconds required to saunter on down Gumdrop Lane to Pinko Paradise with Bernie butt-fucking Sanders, you know you got some splaining to do. Granted, this is CNN, so it goes without saying he wasn't asking these questions for fear of fiscal ruin. He's an establishment assbag being fitted for his fucking cranky pants because a Clinton is nowhere near the White House. Least of all now that her handpicked boy Bloomberg got scalped by Chief Running Mouth.
A billionaire who calls women fat broads and horse-faced lesbians. And no, I'm not talking about Donald Trump. I'm talking about Mayor Bloomberg.
Let me say a couple things, and if I can have my full minute and a quarter, thank you. I am very proud of the fact that about 2 weeks ago, we were awarded we were voted the the best place to work, second best place in America.
And I hope you heard what his defense was. I've been nice to some women. He has gotten some number of women, dozens, who knows, to sign non-disclosure agreements, both for sexual harassment and for gender discrimination in the workplace. So, Mr. Mayor, are you willing to release all of those women from those non-disclosure agreements so we can hear their side of the story?
Fatality. But shelving that exchange between stalking horse and crazy horse, the coup's concerns, while apt, also missed the point by a mile. What did I say in my post-election 2016 offering? For a candidate for public office, a firm grasp of the fucking issues is great. But it's also inconsequential to a broad electorate that thinks a deficit is a handicapped guy who can't hear. We do not elect our leaders based on applicable occupational experience or empirical knowledge. We choose them for vacuous reasons like name recognition, shallow charisma, relatability. It's one of the reasons the Founding Fathers were careful as a Catholic priest in an altar boy orgy to delineate the specific powers enumerated to the democratic populace, such as public works and the like, and even more careful that none of them included issues of individual liberty. A firewall we sadly crossed in or around the Woodrow Wilson administration, because then as now as always, the public is an ass, and in 2020, it's in full-blown prolapse. So believe me when I say that while Bernie's bona fides economically should be a liability electorally, by the vapid metrics upon which we actually elect our presidents, he does come across across as an actual human being, albeit one whose driver's license is in Roman numerals. Fortunately, those same skin-deep criteria also tend to disqualify a septuagenarian heart attack survivor mere months distant from the fucking big one. You could say he's young at heart, but that depends which part of his heart you're actually referring to. So believe me when I say that while the fact that he's a regional candidate without the same resonance in major population strongholds enjoyed by others on the DNC ticket, and thus I believe Bernie will lose, and convincingly, in a general election, particularly once one of these doozies makes its way into a Trump campaign ad.
How do you find the sincerity of Sandinista leaders?
I was impressed. Now, obviously, I will be attacked by every editorial writer in the Free Press for being a dumb dupe. Maybe I am. I was impressed by their intelligence and by their sincerity. Ortega is an impressive guy.
More than 200 people have been killed in anti-government protests and unrest since April. Demonstrators are demanding democratic reforms. There's also growing calls for President Daniel Ortega to step down and to hold early elections.
He's been using government-backed paramilitaries to crack down on the protesters. And one big question is, will the military itself eventually intervene? And the situation has gotten worse and worse.
Authoritarian ruler Daniel Ortega looked to silence dissent, pitting gunfire and snipers against locals.
There is, however, believe it or not, a high chance it won't be quite the blowout you anticipate, because, again, it ain't about the issues. If elections were waged on a purely political basis, I do believe the same result would ultimately emerge. Namely, that the voting public would take one look at the blustering buffoon in the White House, chance a glance at the hammer and sickle in a suit who combs his hair with a fucking balloon challenging him, and say to themselves, I do believe I prefer crackpots to Pol Pots. But Bernie's past remarks and indulgence in apologia on behalf of tin pot despots is ultimately of little consequence here. His base will bite down on a cyanide gel cap if college subsidies and student debt forgiveness come along for the helicopter ride. That's what primaries are ultimately about at the end of the day. Placating the fucking fringe before a more electable, alternative position is posited once the general election rolls around. No, the data Democrats should find most alarming here has nothing to do with Bernie. It has everything to do with Donald Trump. Namely, that his voter turnout outdrew not just the baggy-eyed Bolshevik in question, but their entire field in a primary that was effectively a fucking formality. You can crap on the crowds Trump pulls every evening all you like. As a measurement of pure political momentum, rallies ultimately mattered in 2016, and they still matter like a motherfucker in 2020. And from Phoenix to Denver to Indiana, Trump is going down like the Beatles at Shea Stadium, all without attaching himself parasitically to a Strokes concert like Sanders. Good band name choice after suffering a catastrophic health scare, by the way, Bernie. Who thunk up those optics? Dr. Midnight? Fuck, Tommy Lee's on the Lennon Express. Ask Motley Crue to play Kickstart My Heart next time. But what should make his stint skip a beat is comparing the size of even Bernie's padded crowds. From Facebook rally live streams outdrawn by Trump to the tune of 5 fucking times, to attendance that, while still impressive, is often outdrawn by the overflow at the average Trump rally. If conservatives are turning up in droves for what is effectively a presidential rock concert and voting for Trump in primaries that mean effectively nothing, what does that say about where the actual energy lies? Don't compare Bernie directly to Trump just yet. That isn't fair when there's 5 other fucks in the field along with him. No, it's when comparing him to what the entire Democratic stage is drawing that Sanders should be shitting his fucking depends. Proof in practice that you can only be a true revolutionary the first fucking time. Every subsequent effort, particularly after you cucked out to Clinton and fucked off to your $1 million lakeside daddy war bunker with pallets of college kid cash in tow, will be met with diminishing returns and dwindling energy. At least as of this moment, Bernie is the front runner. But he's also king shit a Mount Manure, planting his red flag atop a Democratic field that looks about as energized and youthful as the early bird at fucking Denny's, with the voter turnout to match. And if I may field a bit of professional advice, I think the problem may be the venue. Everyone knows socialists do their best turnout at a cemetery. I'm Razor Fist. God fucking speed.
I'm not looking at Venezuela. I'm not looking at Cuba.
Previously during the investigation.
Everybody was totally convinced that Castro was the worst guy in the world, that all the Cuban people were going to rise up in rebellion against Fidel Castro. They had forgot that he educated their kids, gave them health care, totally transformed the society. You know, not to say that Fidel Castro or Cuba are perfect.